He never raised his voice. He never needed to. There's a version of narcissism that doesn't look like the one you've heard about. No grandiose bragging, no obvious cruelty, no red flags waving in the wind. This version is quieter. So quiet that most people who live with it spend years wondering if they're the problem, if they're too sensitive, if they're imagining things that were never really there. This is the covert narcissist, and they are, in many ways, far harder to identify than the loud, obvious kind. In the next 30 minutes, you'll learn the 5 hidden signs that separate a covert narcissist from someone who's simply reserved or shy, why these signs are so easy to miss, even when you're standing right in front of them, and, through the lens of Carl Jung's work, what's actually happening beneath the surface of someone who hides this well. If you've ever left a conversation with someone feeling smaller than when it started, without being able to explain exactly why, if you've ever been told you're too sensitive by someone who never actually did anything you could point to, this video is going to feel uncomfortably familiar. Because covert narcissism doesn't announce itself, it doesn't perform for a crowd. It works in private, in subtlety, in the small moments no one else ever sees. And that's exactly what makes it so dangerous and so rarely named. Let's start with the first sign, the one almost everyone misses. To understand the covert narcissist, you first have to let go of everything the word narcissist usually brings to mind. Most people picture the grandiose type, loud, self-congratulating, constantly the center of attention, visibly obsessed with status and admiration. That version is real, and it's the one psychology talked about for decades. But researchers have long identified a second type, one that operates almost invisibly, the vulnerable or covert narcissist. Where the grandiose narcissist seeks admiration through performance, the covert narcissist seeks control through quiet manipulation, and often through the appearance of being the victim. They don't boast about their achievements. They don't need a room full of people applauding them. What they need, at the core, is the exact same thing every narcissist needs: to be the emotional center of every relationship, every conversation, every dynamic they're part of. They've simply found a different way to get there. This is why covert narcissists are so often mistaken for something else entirely: shy, sensitive, deeply misunderstood, even self-sacrificing. They present as the person who's always struggling, always overlooked, always somehow wronged by everyone around them. And because that presentation looks so much like genuine vulnerability, the people closest to them spend years extending compassion to someone who is, underneath it, using that compassion as a tool. Here's the mechanism that makes this so hard to see. Covert narcissists rarely attack directly. Instead, they use what psychologists call passive control. The sigh instead of the demand, the silence instead of the accusation, the subtle comment that leaves you apologizing for something you're not even sure you did. There's no dramatic scene to point to afterward, just a lingering feeling of confusion and often guilt that doesn't seem to belong to you. This is also why covert narcissism does so much damage in long-term relationships specifically. A grandiose narcissist might be easy to spot and, eventually, easy to walk away from. The behavior is loud enough to name. A covert narcissist can spend years inside a relationship, a friendship, or a family, quietly rewriting the emotional rules, while everyone around them remains convinced that they are simply a deeply sensitive person who's had a hard life. And in many cases, that's not even a lie. Covert narcissism often does develop from real early wounds. A childhood where love was inconsistent, where the child learned that vulnerability was the only reliable way to receive attention. But an origin story doesn't cancel out impact. Understanding where this pattern comes from doesn't mean excusing what it does to the people living inside it. What we're going to do now is break this down into 5 specific, recognizable signs. Not vague personality traits, but actual patterns you can identify in real interactions. Because once you can name what you're seeing, you stop questioning your own perception. And that, for many people caught in this dynamic, is the first real relief they've felt in years. Every relationship has moments of real hardship, and every person deserves compassion when they're struggling. But with a covert narcissist, victimhood isn't occasional, it's structural. It's the default lens through which almost everything gets filtered. Notice the pattern. Whenever accountability enters the room, the subject quietly shifts. A conversation about something they did wrong somehow becomes a conversation about how hard their life has been, how misunderstood they feel, how no one ever considers their side. The facts of the situation get buried under an avalanche of old wounds, past unfairness and present suffering, and by the end of the conversation, you're the one comforting them, even though you were the one who brought up a legitimate concern. This isn't occasional emotional overwhelm. It's a consistent exit ramp away from accountability, one that works precisely because genuine compassion makes it feel cruel to keep pushing. Who wants to be the person who doesn't show sympathy to someone in pain? That hesitation is exactly what covert narcissism relies on. Sign #2. Backhanded compliments and subtle put-downs disguised as care. This one is harder to catch in the moment because it's wrapped in language that sounds supportive on the surface. "I'm just worried about you," before a comment that quietly undermines your confidence. "I only say this because I care," before a critique that leaves you smaller than before. "Wow, you actually did well this time," a sentence that technically praises you while implying you usually don't. These comments rarely feel like attacks in real time. They feel like concern, like honesty, like someone who simply tells it like it is. It's only afterward, sometimes hours later, that the actual impact settles in. A quiet erosion of your confidence, delivered in a tone gentle enough that naming it out loud feels like an overreaction. This is one of the clearest markers separating covert narcissism from simple bluntness. A blunt person's feedback, even when harsh, tends to leave you with clarity. A covert narcissist's feedback tends to leave you with doubt about the situation, about your own perception, and eventually about yourself. Both of these signs share the same underlying function. They allow the covert narcissist to maintain control of the emotional narrative while appearing, at every step, to be the reasonable one. The victim posture protects them from accountability. The subtle put-down keeps you slightly off balance, slightly less sure of your own judgment, which makes you slightly easier to manage. Individually, either of these might look like nothing. A bad day, an offhand comment. That's exactly the point. Covert narcissism isn't built on singular dramatic moments. It's built on repetition so consistent and so quiet that by the time the pattern becomes visible, you've already spent months, sometimes years, doubting a perception that was accurate the entire time. There are 3 more signs, and the next one is often the hardest for people to recognize because it doesn't look like narcissism at all. It looks like humility. This is the sign that looks the least like narcissism, which is exactly why it's so effective. Where the grandiose narcissist openly believes they're better than everyone around them, the covert narcissist believes the exact same thing, but wraps it in modesty. Listen for the pattern underneath the self-deprecation. "I'm probably wrong, but," followed by an opinion delivered as though it settles the matter entirely. "I'm not trying to brag, but," followed by exactly that. A quiet, persistent tone of being misunderstood by people who simply aren't operating on their level, not stated outright, but implied consistently enough that you start to feel it without being able to point to a single sentence that proves it. This superiority rarely announces itself. It shows up in subtle dismissiveness, a slight eye roll at someone else's opinion, a tone that suggests your perspective is charmingly naive, a way of receiving your achievements that feels more like tolerance than genuine celebration. And because it's never stated directly, calling it out tends to result in genuine confusion or offense. I never said I was better than you. Technically true, but the feeling in the room says otherwise, every time. Sign #4. Emotional withdrawal used as punishment. This is one of the most damaging signs because it rarely gets named for what it is. When a covert narcissist feels criticized, ignored, or simply not sufficiently prioritized, the response is rarely an argument. It's a withdrawal, sudden coldness, short answers, a noticeable absence of the warmth that was there just hours before. No explanation is given, no conversation happens, just a shift in emotional temperature so distinct that you can feel it walk into the room before a single word is spoken. And because nothing was technically said, you're left to fill in the silence yourself, usually by apologizing for something you're not even certain you did wrong, just to restore the warmth that disappeared. This is what psychologists sometimes call the silent treatment as control. Not a need for space to process emotions, which is healthy and human, but a deliberate withdrawal designed to make the other person anxious enough to chase the reconnection. And it works, because the alternative, sitting in that cold, unexplained distance, feels unbearable to almost anyone who cares about the relationship. What makes signs 3 and 4 so effective together is the whiplash they create. The quiet superiority keeps you feeling slightly inadequate. The emotional withdrawal keeps you feeling slightly desperate for approval. Between the two, a person can spend years in a relationship built almost entirely on managing someone else's emotional state without ever fully understanding why they feel so exhausted or why keeping the peace has become a full-time, invisible job. There's one more sign left, and it's the one that ties every other pattern together, the one Carl Jung would recognize immediately. This is the sign that explains all the others. Underneath the victimhood, the backhanded compliments, the quiet superiority, and the emotional withdrawal, there's a single fragile core, a self-image so unstable that any perceived criticism, even mild, even accidental, feels like a genuine threat. You'll see it in how disproportionately they react to feedback that most people would shrug off. A minor correction at work, a gentle disagreement in conversation, a joke that wasn't even about them. The reaction rarely matches the size of the moment because it was never really about the moment. It was about a wound so old and so carefully hidden that even they may not fully understand why it hurts as much as it does. This is what separates covert narcissism from simple insecurity. An insecure person, when reassured, tends to soften. A covert narcissist, even when reassured, often finds a way to make the reassurance insufficient because the emptiness underneath isn't something external validation can actually fill. It's a hole shaped by something deeper, something that was never given the chance to heal in the first place. And this is exactly where Carl Jung's work becomes essential to understanding what you've been living with. Jung believed that every person constructs a persona, the mask we present to the world, built from whatever earned approval and avoided rejection early in life. For most people, that mask sits over a reasonably stable sense of self. But for someone who develops covert narcissism, the mask isn't sitting over stability. It's sitting over a shadow, a hidden, unintegrated part of the self, built from shame, inadequacy, and early wounds too painful to face directly. The persona of the covert narcissist is humility, sensitivity, quiet suffering. But underneath that persona, in the shadow, lives something closer to what grandiose narcissism shows openly. A desperate, aching need to be seen as important, as good, as worthy. A need so intense that it can't risk exposure to genuine scrutiny. So instead of confronting that shadow, the covert narcissist builds an entire identity designed to protect it. Every sign we've covered, the victimhood, the subtle superiority, the withdrawal, is a different wall around the exact same fragile core. This is not an excuse for the impact this pattern has on the people around them. But it is the key to finally understanding something that, from the outside, looks contradictory. How someone can seem so humble, so sensitive, so wounded, and still leave the people closest to them feeling quietly diminished over and over again. The mask isn't fake in the way people usually assume. It's real in the sense that the person wearing it often believes it completely. What's hidden isn't a performance. It's a shadow so threatening that an entire personality gets built just to keep it out of view, including out of view from the person carrying it. To understand how this shadow forms, you have to go back to where every shadow begins, childhood, and the specific conditions under which a child learns what parts of themselves are safe to show. Jung believed the shadow isn't something a person is born with. It's assembled piece by piece in response to what the environment could and couldn't tolerate. In the case of covert narcissism, researchers have observed a particular pattern that shows up again and again. A childhood where love felt conditional on being impressive, useful, or emotionally convenient, combined, often, with an environment where the child's authentic emotional needs were dismissed, minimized, or even mocked. Picture a child who cries and is told to stop being dramatic, who expresses excitement about an achievement and is met with indifference, or worse, subtle diminishment. That's nice, but a child who learns early and repeatedly that their authentic self, needs, emotions, ordinary human vulnerability is somehow too much, or not enough, or simply inconvenient to the adults around them. Faced with that environment, a child has limited options. One path leads to the grandiose narcissist, performing greatness so loudly that no one can ignore it, building an identity around undeniable achievement as protection against ever feeling small again. But the other path, the one that leads to covert narcissism, involves a different strategy entirely. This child learns that vulnerability itself can be leveraged, that being delicate, misunderstood, quietly suffering, actually does generate attention and care in a way that direct, confident self-expression never did. So the child adapts, and the adaptation works well enough that it hardens, over years, into a core identity. The persona of fragility isn't chosen consciously. It's built the same way any shadow-driven pattern is built, as the most effective available strategy for surviving an environment that didn't allow the whole, authentic self to exist safely. Here's what Jung's framework adds that most psychological descriptions miss. This isn't manipulation in the cartoonish sense people often imagine. In most cases, the person genuinely believes their own performance. The covert narcissist isn't secretly calculating each interaction with cold precision. They're operating from a shadow so deeply buried that the persona built to protect it has become, to them, simply who they are. The victimhood feels real because, in a sense, it is real. It's just no longer proportionate to the present moment. It's an old wound, replaying itself in situations that have nothing to do with its original cause. This doesn't remove responsibility for the impact this pattern has on others. Adults are still accountable for how they treat the people around them, regardless of where a pattern originated. But understanding the origin does explain something crucial: why covert narcissism is so difficult to confront directly. You're not simply arguing with a person's behavior. You're pressing, often without realizing it, against a shadow that was built specifically to never be seen. And that brings us to the part of this that matters most. If you recognize yourself on the other side of this dynamic, not as the narcissist, but as the person who's been living around one. If you've recognized these patterns in someone close to you, a partner, a parent, a friend, there's likely a specific kind of exhaustion you've come to know well. Not the exhaustion of conflict, but the exhaustion of walking on ground that never quite feels solid. The first cost is chronic self-doubt. Because covert narcissism operates so subtly, without the loud, obvious red flags people are taught to watch for, the people living alongside it often spend years questioning their own perception instead of questioning the dynamic itself. Was that really a put-down, or am I being too sensitive? Did I actually do something wrong, or did the conversation just get redirected again? Over time, this constant self-interrogation becomes exhausting in a way that's hard to explain to anyone who hasn't lived it. Because from the outside, nothing looks dramatic enough to justify how depleted you feel. The second cost is emotional over-responsibility. If you've spent years around someone who plays the victim whenever accountability approaches, you likely learned, without ever deciding to, that keeping the peace was your job. You became skilled at managing their moods, anticipating their withdrawal before it happened, softening every disagreement so it wouldn't trigger the cold, unexplained distance that always followed conflict. This isn't a personality trait you were born with. It's a survival skill you built, the same way a child builds one inside a house where the emotional temperature is controlled by someone else. The third cost is a gradual erosion of your own needs. Relationships with covert narcissists tend to become one-directional over time, not through a single dramatic imbalance, but through 1,000 small moments where your needs quietly lost priority to theirs, because their fragility always seemed, in the moment, more urgent than your own. Eventually, many people in this dynamic stop bringing up their needs at all, not out of choice, but because experience taught them it wasn't worth the resulting withdrawal or guilt. And the fourth cost, the one that often takes longest to recognize, is a kind of grief that has nowhere to go. Because covert narcissism doesn't look like obvious harm, the people who've lived through it often struggle to name what happened, even to themselves. There's no single incident to point to. Just years of feeling smaller, more anxious, more responsible for someone else's emotional stability than your own. That kind of harm is real, even without a dramatic story to prove it, and it deserves to be taken seriously, including by the person who lived through it. If any of this feels familiar, here's the most important thing to understand. Recognizing this pattern doesn't mean you were foolish for not seeing it sooner. Covert narcissism is specifically designed, not always consciously, but functionally, to be difficult to name. The confusion you felt wasn't a personal failing. It was the intended effect of a pattern built to stay hidden, even from the people living closest to it. Naming it clearly, the way we've done throughout this video, is the first real step towards something different. Recognizing covert narcissism is the first step. What comes next, setting boundaries around it, tends to be the hardest part, precisely because everything about this dynamic was built to make boundaries feel unreasonable. The first shift is learning to separate the story from the pattern. In any single moment, a covert narcissist's victimhood, hurt feelings or withdrawal can feel completely legitimate, because isolated incidents almost always have some plausible explanation. The skill that actually protects you isn't judging each moment individually. It's stepping back far enough to see the pattern across time. One instance of someone deflecting accountability might be an off day. A consistent, years-long pattern of deflection every time accountability comes up is not an off day. It's the architecture of the relationship. The second shift is disengaging from the guilt response. Covert narcissism relies heavily on a specific emotional reflex, the instinct to comfort someone the moment they appear hurt, regardless of the context. Breaking this pattern doesn't mean becoming cold or unkind. It means learning to hold a boundary and acknowledge someone's distress at the same time, without immediately abandoning your own position to soothe it. Something as simple as, "I hear that this is upsetting for you, and I still need to talk about what happened," can feel enormous the first time you say it, and it's often the exact sentence that starts shifting the entire dynamic. The third shift is naming behavior instead of intentions. One of the fastest ways a boundary conversation gets derailed is by focusing on whether someone meant to hurt you, a question covert narcissists are often skilled at turning into an argument about your character instead of their behavior. Naming the specific behavior, "When this happens, this is the impact it has on me," is far harder to redirect than accusations about hidden motives, because it doesn't require proving intent. It only requires describing what's true. The fourth shift, and often the most difficult, is accepting that some people will not change, no matter how clearly the pattern is named. Jung's framework offers real hope for transformation, but only for the person willing to face their own shadow directly, which requires a level of self-confrontation many covert narcissists spend their entire lives avoiding, precisely because that shadow was built to protect against exactly this kind of exposure. You cannot do that work for someone else. You can only decide how much of your own life you're willing to organize around waiting for it. None of this requires cutting someone off entirely, unless that's the boundary that genuinely serves you. For some people, the answer is distance. For others, it's a more limited, protected version of the relationship, one where expectations are realistic and your own emotional well-being is no longer treated as negotiable. There's no single correct outcome here. What matters is that the decision comes from clarity rather than from the confusion this pattern was specifically built to create. Because the moment you can see the pattern clearly enough to name it, you stop being managed by it, and you start, for the first time, actually choosing your response instead of simply reacting to it. There's one more layer to this that deserves honesty, even though it's uncomfortable. The same framework that helps you recognize covert narcissism in someone else can also become a mirror. None of us grew up with a perfectly integrated shadow. Everyone carries some version of a persona built to earn love and avoid rejection. And everyone, at some point, has deflected accountability, withdrawn instead of communicating, or let old wounds distort a present moment that didn't deserve it. The difference between an ordinary human shadow and covert narcissism isn't the presence of these moments, it's their frequency, their consistency, and, most importantly, whether there's any willingness ever to look at them honestly. This distinction matters because it's easy, especially after learning language like this, to start seeing the pattern everywhere. In a partner who simply had a hard day, in a friend who genuinely needed comfort, in a parent whose vulnerability was real rather than strategic. Jung's work was never meant to become a weapon for diagnosing everyone around you. It was meant to be a tool for understanding, first in yourself, and only then, more carefully, in the patterns you observe in others. So here's the honest question worth sitting with. Are there moments where you recognize a small version of this in yourself? A tendency to deflect when criticized, a quiet resentment when you don't receive enough acknowledgement, a withdrawal instead of a direct conversation when something hurts? If the answer is yes, and for most people it is, at least sometimes, that doesn't make you a narcissist. It makes you human, carrying a shadow like everyone else, shaped by your own early experiences of what felt safe to show and what didn't. The difference, again, is what you do with that recognition. Jung believed the entire purpose of encountering the shadow, whether in yourself or reflected back at you through someone else, was integration, not judgment. Not building a case against yourself and not building a permanent case against another person, but developing the capacity to see clearly, take responsibility where it's genuinely yours to take, and release the responsibility that was never yours in the first place. This is, in the end, what separates covert narcissism from an ordinary human shadow. The covert narcissist's defining trait isn't having a shadow. Everyone has one. It's the refusal, consistent and protected at every turn, to ever look at it directly. Which means the very act of watching this video, of being willing to examine your own patterns honestly, already places you somewhere fundamentally different from the dynamic we've spent the last half hour describing. That willingness, uncomfortable as it is where every real change actually begins. Not in diagnosing someone else with perfect certainty, but in becoming someone capable of honest self-reflection, in a way the pattern we've discussed today was specifically built to avoid. If you've spent this video recognizing someone else, a partner, a parent, a friend, trust what you've seen. The confusion you felt for so long wasn't a flaw in your perception. It was the intended effect of a pattern built to stay hidden, even from the people standing closest to it. And if, somewhere in this video, you also recognized a piece of yourself, a shadow you've never fully looked at, that recognition isn't a failure either. It's the first, most difficult step Jung believed every person is capable of taking, the willingness to see clearly rather than stay comfortable. Naming a pattern doesn't erase the years spent inside it, but it does change what happens next. It's the difference between being shaped by something invisible and finally choosing, consciously, how to respond to it. If this video helped you make sense of something you've carried for a long time, consider subscribing. This channel explores narcissism, dark psychology, and the human mind through Carl Jung's framework, the patterns most people never get explained clearly, and the path back to yourself underneath them. And if you recognized any of these 5 signs in your own life, leave a comment. Sometimes naming it out loud, even to strangers, is the first real step out of the confusion. Thank you for spending this time here. Whatever pattern brought you to this video, you now see it more clearly than you did 30 minutes ago. And that clarity is yours to keep.